Hey everybody, this is Miss Corey. This is not my normal recording. My other recorder that I use is down right now, so I'm using Google, which is fine. Google Meets is fine. All right, let's get at it today. So U3-L2 Intro to Ancient War in Sun Tzu. So learning targets, you're going to identify ancient weapons and their technological advantages. Your job, you're going to watch this ed puzzle all the way through to the end. While watching, questions that I ask you in blue text are just questions I want you to answer on the ed puzzle. So the ed puzzle will hopefully pause and like a little text box will pop up. Just answer the questions in the like pop-up box. While any vocab words are going to be in the magenta text, those are the ones that I want you to define on your study guide under lesson 2. All right, so this is kind of like the outlook of the unit. Unit 3 is huge, so it goes from now until January 5th. I know, it goes all the way to January. Crazy. There are 2 study guides for Unit 3. There's a Part 1 and a Part 2. Right now, you have access to Part 1. And then, Part 1 is due December 3rd, by the way. And then Part 2, you will get access to on December 4th. So for part 1, the movies include Art of War, which is a documentary that we'll watch next week, Redcliffe and Braveheart. And then for part 2 study guide, that's going to cover American Sniper and In This Corner of the World. I know, a lot to keep track of. So here's the calendar for the unit. Fun, right? So let's zoom in on the calendar a little bit more, and I'll walk you through what we're going to do each week. So for this week, you got the part 1 of the Unit 3 study guide. Again, that's due December 3rd. And then for this week, today, if you're watching this on Thursday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday, you're doing this video about Intro to Ancient War and Sun Tzu. Next week, we are going to start off with the documentary, The Art of War. That's a documentary about Sun Tzu and his philosophies. After that, you're going to do U3-L6, which is the Three Kingdoms Ed puzzle. It's an oversimplified video, I believe, which I know is not the most like professional to watch, but honestly, it is the best video out there that I could find that explains the Three Kingdoms conflict. And the Three Kingdoms conflict is what Redcliffe the movie is all about. And then on Friday, we will start Redcliffe. And then we'll continue Redcliffe into next week, and we'll end that on the 17th. And then after that, we're going to do the intro to medieval warfare. So that's right here, U3-L12. And then after we do that, you'll start Braveheart, which is unfortunate timing because you start Braveheart and then Thanksgiving break happens. Yeah, I know, right? So then after we're done with Thanksgiving break, you'll come back to Braveheart. And we'll finish that up on December 1st. And then that takes us all the way into December. So the week after that, you're going to start the part 2, U3-L19, which is the Unit 3 Study Guide Part 2. That's due January 7th. And then we're going to start off with the Intro to American Sniper and Modern Warfare. And then we're going to start American Sniper. And that will take us all the way until December 13th. December 14th, you're going to do some stuff about the legacy of Chris Kyle because, I mean, he was a real person, so we'll learn a little bit about him. And then on December 15th, we start the intro to the other side of war, which we talk about World War II, specifically Japan. Then we will start In This Corner of the World, which times out perfectly with winter break. Could not have asked for perfect timing, because you actually end that on December 21st, and on the 22nd, you start winter break. Pretty fun. All right, so winter break happens when you get back to school on January 2nd. We'll be working on the Unit 3 summative, and that will be due January 7th, along with your U3-L19 study guide part 2. I know, crazy, right? That was like a lot of information I just threw at you. Don't worry, we'll walk it through all together. Just focus on doing week by week. You'll be fine. I just wanted to give you an overview of what we will be doing this gigantic unit. And then after that, we start Unit 4, which is our last unit. So that's pretty cool. So today we're going to talk about the basics of ancient warfare. So today we're going to talk about chariots, bow and arrows. We won't talk about phalanxes today. I forgot to delete that. We will talk about horses, saddles, and stirrups. We'll talk about the Tao when it comes to swords. We'll also talk about catapults, crossbows, jian, and the tortoise formation. So the first one we want to talk about are chariots. Now, chariots were first used in Mesopotamia in about 3000 BCE, so about 5,000 years ago. Mesopotamia is today it would be located in what we call the Middle East. It was first used in royal funeral processions, so it actually wasn't used for warfare. It was used for ceremonial reasons. The early version of the chariot included four wheels instead of two wheels. But over time, it went down just to two wheels, like you see here in this picture, a fixed axle. So that means that both the wheels turn at the same time instead of having one wheel turn that way and like one wheel turn that way, and then the whole thing falls over. And also a fixed pole that attached to the yoke of the oxen. So you can kind of see it in this picture. It's between the chariot and, well, in this picture, it's horses. But that would help stabilize the chariot with riding and help control whatever animal is pulling it. So chariots were mounted by both a charioteer and a spearman, one for driving and one for stabbing, especially when they were used in warfare, of course. And it was driven by oxen at first, so horses weren't domesticated. I, I know I say two different dates in the slideshow. It really wasn't domesticated till about 2000 BCE that they were domesticated enough to like pull chariots, but domestication started about 3500 BCE. And oxen were stronger than horses, so those were the original animals to pull chariots. The only problem with oxen is they are super slow, like duper slow. But that's all they had. That's all they had. So by 2000 BCE, chariots became extremely light. Most of them were made out of wood with maybe a little bit of metal to protect the people riding in them. Their axles were also movable. So again, you could turn easier. They also had spoked wheels. This seems like a really trivial invention in human history, like spoked wheels, like wheels with the little like sticks in them. Those are called spokes, like you can see here. Um, you think like, "Really? Spoked wheels helped the chariot go faster?" Yeah, it did. It cut down on the weight of the wheel by over 50%, making the chariot not only faster, but easier to turn. So horses and chariots were put together in about 2000 BCE. And they're like, hey, horses are super fast, not like oxen. So let's use these for war. So a lot of the time, horses and chariots equaled a vast military conquest. Chariots during war could carry two men, if not more. Of course, they could outpace human on foot. The sides would also protect the rider from anybody trying to like stab them or slash them. And it was also really important to carry goods on military campaigns. So it could do like medicine, it could carry food, weapons, like the stuff that you need that doesn't kill people. All right, so by 320s BCE, chariots became obsolete. It was just easier to do warfare on horseback thanks to the invention of the saddle. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Chariot races were super duper popular during the ancient Olympic Games. So it started with the Greeks back in 700 BCE. That's when the first Olympics were started. It ended in the Roman Empire. I hate when that happens. Um, in 320 or 393 it ended, but these were like huge games during the Olympics. So what would happen if they would just have people with like four horses just riding this chariot and they're just like whipping around this giant oval, and people were just like crashing into walls, they were flying up into the stands, people were getting trampled. It was a bloody and deadly mess and people loved it. Um, so I guess good thing it's not in the modern day Olympics, or else that'd be like not kid friendly. Anyway, let's move on to bow and arrow. So bow and arrow, the most basic way to describe it is that it's an elastic launch device, which is the bow with projectiles, which are the arrows. So arrows typically have sharp ends and also stabilizing fins on the back end, so typically like feathers. The earliest evidence came from actually South Africa in a cave, and that bow dated to between 75,000 to 60,000 years ago. Crazy. The first bows were made of wood, and the bowstring was made of some sort of fiber. Typically, it was made out of hemp fiber, which was a lot of ancient ropes were made out of hemp, as well as other vegetation, fiber, or hair. The first arrows were made out of wood with flint or an obsidian tip. Obsidian is a lava rock, and it's really easy to break. And when it does break, it's really, really sharp. So they made excellent arrowheads. Uh, they were also used in hunting and warfare. They were a long way, long range weapon, so they could fire anywhere between 64 to 180 meters. If you need American terms on that, that is 1.5 football fields. And then there are horses. Okay, so I love talking about horses in history. I'm not a horse person otherwise. Um, Like, I know some people love horses. I mean, they're fine animals, but if you're like a horse lover and you're like, "You're saying all of this wrong and getting this wrong," just let me know. But I I think I know enough about horses. Um, so horses, they're the greatest animal companion to human history. Okay, you could argue dogs too, whatever. But horses, you can ride on them. They can pull carts and farm equipment. They're used for battle. They're used in art, social status. Yes, they're even eaten. Um, Paleolithic art of wild horses have been found in caves dating back to up to 30,000 BCE. So horses are really interesting because you probably think like, oh, they're probably domesticated like in the Middle East or Europe, but they weren't actually. They were domesticated on the Eurasian steppes. If you don't know where that is, that's modern day Mongolia and parts of China, actually. And they were domesticated up to 3,500 BCE. I know on one of my previous slides I said like 2000 BCE. Um, there's a lot of different estimates out there. There was used in ancient cultures such as China, Rome, Greece, Egypt, Assyria, and Persia. So there wasn't just one culture that dominated horses. Everyone used them, except for in North and South America. There was a kind of a horse in North and South America, but it wasn't domesticated like horses we think of today are. So horses were not originally ridden, they were used to pull chariots. So, question for you, what does someone need to have in order to ride a horse? All right, so if you're a horse person, you probably know this. Um, but you need saddles and stirrups. So saddles, those were invented in by the Assyrian Empire at about 700 BCE. Again, if you don't know where Assyria is, that is in modern day, like Iraq area in the Middle East. There wasn't anything fancy about them. There was just a thick cloth or piece of leather laid over the back of the horse, and it was used to sit more comfortably on the horse. Because if you ever sat on a horse bareback, it's very bony and bumpy. And it had to use, the person riding it had to use their hands to steer and control the horse. But with the invention of stirrups, they didn't have to control it with their hands anymore. So stirrups are the things that dangle from the saddle, so humans can put like their feet in it to steer the horse just by using feet, and also to help mount the horse. It was created back in about 200 BCE by the Persians, and it allowed a person to ride a horse with their hands empty, and that's very, very important for my next question. If a person's hands are free while riding a horse, thanks to the saddle and stirrup, what do you think people, specifically soldiers, are going to start carrying in their hands while riding horses? Weapons! Yes, yes, weapons. All right, let's talk about some weapons. So the Dao. This is the single edge Chinese sword. It was first made in the Shang Dynasty. Shang Dynasty is also known as the Chinese Bronze Age. That was between 1600 and 1045 BCE. It's unique because it has a curved blade, but also the hilt, which is the handle of the sword, is also curved, but in the opposite direction. So you can see here on the picture, it's curved. The blade is curved like this, but the hilt is curved like this. And that is for more power for thrusting and cutting. So when you like, use it, there's more, oh my God, what is it called? Like force, but like it's easier to control the sword as you're swinging it through the air so you can kill more people. It's pretty much what that is. All right, a little bit more about it. There's also a cup shade guard. So the guard is the piece of metal between the hilt and the blade, so the hand just doesn't slip off as you're swinging it around. It was originally used to prevent rainwater getting into the scarab. A scarab is a case for a sword. But the best part of it is that it didn't only catch rainwater, it caught blood. So when you were slashing your enemies and you're getting all bloodied up, it would protect your hand from getting bloody. Because if you get blood in your hand, it's really easy for the sword to slip out of your hand, and you don't want that when you're in the middle of a battle. All right, let's talk about catapults because that's fun. So catapults were invented by the Greeks in about 399 BCE. There's also evidence of the ancient Egyptians having them all the way back from 1900 BCE at the fortress of Buhin. And if you took my world history course, we talked about that, which was really cool. It was used to hurl stones via a long strip or long string arm. So as you can see here in the diagram, there's like the arm, right, with the like little cup with the rock in it. Um, and then there's the string right below it. So the string would get tighter and tighter and tighter, lowering the arm. And then once that string was either cut or released, the arm would fling back up and fling the rock and go hit something. So it is still used today to launch US Navy aircrafts, which is cool. I just learned that today, by the way. They don't use rocks and string, though. They use an electromagnetic catapult, which I don't completely understand, but that's okay. It's still cool. Crossbows. Ooh, classic. So crossbows pop up all around the world, but the first one was made in China. It's first mentioned in a text about 200 CEE, but it was created far prior to that, but historians just don't know exactly when. It was typically wood, but in China, it could also be made out of bronze, and it consists of two flexible limbs and a middle groove track. So you can see here in the picture on the bottom, there are, like two kind of like curvy little limbs, and then the middle groove track, that's where you would put your arrow. So what you would do is you would pull back the string from the limbs, place the arrow or the bolt in that groove track, and then you would release the string and it would launch forward. The only good like little gif I could find about the crossbow was one of someone like launching a matchstick, but it gives like a really good description of how like the string, you pull it back, you put in the matchstick, and then you launch it. Pretty cool. In the Han Dynasty, they also had bolts that they would use instead of arrows, which are just like these little metal deadly spear things. Lovely. Okay, anyway, moving on. There's also the Jian, which is a type of sword. It was the first Chinese-made double-edged sword. It was about 27 inches long, but it only weighed about 2 pounds, which is very, very light. It was first mentioned in text dating back to about the 600s BCE. First, it was made out of bronze, but then due to like advanced smelting techniques, so where humans could melt metals at a higher temperature, it would be made out of steel. There's also some really cool examples of these swords made out of jade. So if you don't know what jade is, like this opaque rock, um, and they were only used for ceremonial purposes, but they're really cool. Here's a picture of one of the jade swords right here. I think they came from the Metropolitan Art Museum, which is one of my favorite websites. They have a lot of really great stuff. Anyway, tortoise formation. Now, this is something you will see in Red Cliff. It is a military tactic in China What the purpose is to break the defending army into like a labyrinth style maze. So here's a picture of it right here. So you can see, like, oh, there's like a wall that they built. No, those are soldiers with all their shields like on the ground, and they're building like a man wall. Um, and it's just this giant labyrinth maze with few entrances and few exits. So the enemy would then enter into that maze of like man walls. I don't know how else to describe that. Um, and their forces would immediately break up into the maze. The defending army would then stab and slash the enemy that fell into their maze. And the enemy couldn't escape because what the walls would do, since they're made out of men, they would move, blocking any exits. It was unknown when the first like tortoise formation was used, but it was used during the Three Kingdoms era, which was from 220 to 280 CE, and that's the time period that Redcliffe is set in. So here's some more pictures of what the tortoise formation looks like. So again, you can see all these soldiers lined up, making walls. You can see kind of the labyrinth, like there's entrances, there's many little arms that like the enemy soldiers would have to ride through. Here's more of like a top view. They call it the tortoise formation because it looks like the back of a tortoise shell, by the way. So you can see here, and then like the enemy soldiers would block off all the exits, or not the enemy soldiers, like the defending soldiers would block off all the exits so the enemy soldiers can't get out. It's a risky move though. It's risky. The movie will talk about it. So Redcliffe, that's our movie. Fun. It was produced in about 2008 to 2009. 2008 it was released in China. 2009 it was released to the rest of the world. It is a Chinese film. It is dubbed. There is a subbed version, but I think the dubbed is kind of like it's not supposed to be funny, but it's just fun to watch because the lips don't match up with the words, and I just find it very entertaining. Anyway, there is a 2.5-hour version and there's a 4.5-hour version. I opted for the 2.5-hour version. It takes place at the end of the Han Dynasty. U3-L6 will talk a lot more about kind of the setup of the characters and their relationships with each other before you watch the movie. So let's talk a little bit about the Han Dynasty. So before Han China was broken up into the Zhao Dynasty, which had several warring states. And what warring states are where independent territories are in constant battle with each other, fighting over land, fighting over resources. So the ruler of the Qin in the Zhao dynasty, his name was Huangdi, conquered the warring states and kind of like the remaining part of the Zhao dynasty. And under his rule, he expanded his territory to cover most of what modern day China is. So here's a map of the Han Dynasty. You can see it goes up here into Mongolia, all the way down here. Um, it stops here and where like modern day Vietnam would be. Goes all the way here up through Korea. You can even see the Chinese walls. It's kind of like that little zigzaggy pattern. Pretty cool. All right, so there's a lot to talk about the Han Dynasty, but let's just go over kind of some of the like societal things that they did. So in 2 CE, the Chinese government census had about 60 million people living in the Han Dynasty in 2 CE. Crazy, right? Just put in perspective, the state of Minnesota is only 6 million people approximately. Multiple generations lived under the same house. Of course, the eldest male were the head of the family. And there was a lot of respect for elders, ancestors, and the gods. The only women that really ever had power in the Han Dynasty were wives or moms to the emperor or other high ranking officials. Otherwise, women were subject to like male rule. Parents would choose who the woman would marry. The bride would go to live off with her husband's family. And before the bride was like officially adopted into the family, she had to prove herself to her mother-in-law that she was worthy. And that ended up with the bride and the mom-in-law competing for the intention of the dude. Um, So it was a very male-focused society. So much so, here's kind of a quote about what women were expected to do. So it says a woman's duties are to cook the 5 grains, heat the wine, look after her parents in law, make clothes, and that is all. She has no ambitions to manage affairs outside the house. She must follow the 3 submissions. When she is young, must submit to her parents. After her marriage, she must submit to her husband. And when she is widowed, she must submit to her son. So pretty much during the Han Dynasty, the woman always was submitted to a male. Here's kind of the social chart of Chinese society at that time. So below we have like the enslaved class, and then actually above that were the soldiers, right? Usually you think, oh, the soldiers would be above like the peasants. The peasants were actually in the middle of this social class, because Chinese society saw them as really, really essential, right? These are the people that are making the food. They're out there in the fields, farming. So that's why they're kind of in the middle, and artisans and merchants are even below them. All right. And then above the peasants, we have like state officials, nobles, king, governor, and then, of course, the emperor. All right. Sun Tzu. So he was a military general, strategist, and philosopher. No one knows when he was actually alive or if he's multiple people. That just kind of went under the name of Sun Tzu. There's a lot of mystery behind this guy. But he lived sometime between 771 and 256 BCE. He lived in the time of a warring states period. Um, so 6 primary Chinese civilizations in constant battle over land and resources and all that fun stuff. Again, unknown if he was a real person. He might have been many people. He might have been just a dude. But little historical evidence outside of the book of The Art of War is about him. So The Art of War is a very famous book. You can still go to Barnes and Noble and buy it today. The Art of War, this is kind of like a little Britannica description of it because I can't summarize it any better than Britannica has it. But The Art of War is a systematic guide to strategy and tactics for rulers and commanders. The book discusses various maneuvers and the effect of terrain on the outcome of battles. It stresses the importance of accurate information about the enemy's focus, dispositions, and deployments and movements. So it's pretty much how to win a war. There's a lot of really famous quotes. I'll just say 2 of them. One is appear weak when you're strong and strong when you are weak. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Ooh, cool quote. There's a lot of good quotes. All right, so today we talked about chariots, we talked about bow and arrows, we didn't talk about phalanx, but that's okay. We talked about horses, saddle, and stirrups. We talked about the Dao, the Jian, crossbows, the tortoise formation, Han Dynasty, and also Sun Tzu. So next up, you're going to watch U3-L3, L4, and L5, which are all of Art of War specials from the History Channel. So those are all Ed puzzles. As you watch the Ed puzzle, there are going to be a ton of quotes that pop up as you watch. Okay, I do not want you to write down all the quotes. Just choose 3 from each of the videos that you want to write down in your study guide. Okay, just choose 3 from each video to write down in your study guide from each of the L3, L4, and L5 videos. Okay, don't write them all. That's way too much. If you have any questions or comments or want to learn more, just let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out. All right, I think that's the end. Yep, that's the end. All right, see ya.